Well, we're getting close to rounding this out, but not without the icing on the cake, I guess you could say. A lot of people have been wanting to see the science do something for a long time. We've got a lot of things to show you in the next year. 2015 was a year of preparation. This year is a year of demonstration. Next year is a year I don't know what to dub it yet, but it's going to be colossally awesome, at least from this university. This university exists and is solely operating from the people that make it up. Honestly, it's supported by the alumni, by the student body, propagated by such. Um, it is a university of man. It teaches the science of man, the science of mind, and it's absolutely provable in every way, the science, when you factor in the math and what we're going to do with the demonstration in the next few months. And we couldn't operate without people who are giving to this university. I haven't asked for donations this whole conference, but for all of you who have benefited in some way, I know there's all the illegal PDFs out there, pirated and whatever and whatnot, but if you feel you ever got something from that and want to make a contribution back, by all means, you can visit philosophy.org and click on the donate button. That helps the Science and Research Committee to complete its task. It's my honor to, again, bring back up Darren Colomb. For all those who haven't heard his introduction from yesterday on the net, Darren is a laboratory scientist, inventor, musician, cosmologist, philosopher, currently actively working on the home AC generator system to alleviate energy dependency. As I said, we're all seeking to just change the course of humanity in electrical engineering, the way we think about matter. And that will be done through demonstration. The time for talk is over. It's time to, ruffle the waves and make some waves, ruffle feathers, and if you will. The purpose of the science and research is to advance and reform our current science paradigm. Let's get you started, sir. This is a great honor again to introduce you. Please come on up.
Okay. All right. So this is a continuation of yesterday's introduction. We're going to be covering a lot of technical things, a lot of experiments that I've done, experimental evidence that empirically proves Russell's concepts, and furthermore proves that we can apply these things and to great benefit for life on this planet. So as an introduction, it's a lot of text in this one. So as Russellian scientists, we can approach the field of electrical engineering and the proper application of electricity, since we know what it is, with a completely new and broader perspective than what is taught right now. This affords us many abilities, but we can increase the efficiency of electric current, the way it's used, and we can balance our thinking in all these aspects through inspiration and wisdom to model designs of nature, a la Victor Schauberger and Nikola Tesla and many other geniuses, in order to accomplish the same effects of cause that nature does. So mimicking nature is really the way that we'll advance our technology. I'm sure everyone can get on board with that. This quote here, Russell's alluding to solenoids being able to transmute water. This was the sort of where I began with all this. This was so mind-blowing to me from my academic background that I had to learn everything that I could about this to understand it. And I like this quote: "The above stated facts make it necessary for chemists of tomorrow to make use of the electric current, the solenoid, again, the coil, and systems of polarity measurements of gyroscopic planes to do in his laboratory what nature does in its laboratory."
Wow.
So applications. The Russells state three basic applications in the home study course. Number one, power, that doesn't work on the TV. Power projection from anywhere to wherever one wishes to project it without the need of wires and cables. I'm pretty convinced that Nikola Tesla had already figured that out by the 1900s, early 1900s. He did.
In New York City.
Wardenclyffe Tower, yeah.
On Long Island?
That's a talk for another day, I'm afraid. Also, the power of converting solar rays to light and power. I would say that these two are actually quite similar in terms of how you technologically achieve that. And also the power of transmuting one element of matter to another. Again, these are topics for, unfortunately, another time because they're quite extensive. So we're going to get into coil basics. I've thought more about coils than probably anyone because I think of them optically rather than electromagnetically, and I don't know how many people have done that. So coils, like a bar magnet, they divide in equilibrium into a polarized condition. I would say that it divides a zero cathode into male and female anodes. In an optical sense, a coil is a lens. Notice the curvature, indicative of not magnetic lines of flux, but rather optical curvature. This is also called a solenoid or electromagnet in academic parlance, just so people who might be familiar with those terms. There we go. So we're dealing with polarity here, and we're dealing, as I said yesterday, with an undivided and a divided multiplied universe. Multiplying being division occurs first, multiplying effects into a simulated reality. Polarity means division of a balanced condition, an equilibrium, such as a universal equilibrium, into two equally unbalanced conditions which have to move to find their lost balance. So this is as applicable to a bar magnet as it is to a coil. It essentially achieves the same effect. All matter and all attributes of matter are products of motion, light and dark, heat and cold, solidity and tenuity, growth and decay, acidity and alkalinity, and all other conceivable pairs of opposites are cosmically created products of two-way motions, as we were talking about yesterday. Thus, the process of nature's products is polarization. The source of power or energy needed for motivating this process of polarization is the desire of mind. I think we've all become familiar with that this weekend. The polarized condition of a coil produces what are called magnetic poles, which control the balance of all bodies. Academics call these north and south. So in a textbook, this is what you'll see with coils. There's this concept of a current flowing and a magnetic field produced. However, as I was saying yesterday, there are no magnetic fields in nature as such. There are only electric fields of curved motion, which are bounded by magnetic planes of non-motion and zero curvature. All effects of magnetism should be attributed to electrical spiral vortices around still points of gravity shafts. In other words, here's the shaft, here is the electrical spiral motion. However, an academic would term this the magnetic component, but it is not the magnetic component, is it? So there's misconceptions with the solenoid. Russell has this quote that basically says, man's electric current goes both ways and spins around its extending shaft in an inequality of potential. In this way, he divides gravity and extends it in such a manner that both of each pairs of mates, thus divided, are equal. This is what this diagram is showing. This is basically the concept behind every coil that we utilize right now, whether this is in a transformer or in experiments where you need to somehow create a magnetic field on demand, such as an MRI. You ever notice an MRI is basically a high-powered coil, and it's cooled so that it superconducts. But do you notice what the problem is here is that this is static. The diameter is unchanging, versus Russell is suggesting that nature's coil is dynamic. That is to say, it is conical. So electrical engineers assume that solenoids have to be wound in a cylinder shape and it has to be piled up into bunches of layers. This is a very inefficient way to do it compared to how nature does it, because electricity divides for the purpose of multiplying. Again, division preceding multiplication. The diameter of a cylinder is sequentially equal as the coil extends in the direction of its poles, here and here. This means that potential is static in one continuous dimension of extension, that being the length of the cylinder. This is from the Addendum of Atomic Suicide, by the way, which is really interesting to read. So further misconceptions, basically that the current runs in one direction and the direction of the turnings gives you either the polarity north or south. But this is an assumption that current flows one way. Russell's already stated that the current flows two ways. Why? Because this is a two-way universe. It is an interchange rather than one continuous flow, right? Completely different concept, leading to completely different results. So basically, while the recognition of this effect is valid to our senses or sense-based perception, the explanation that science offers for this phenomenon is less than excellent. It's a misinterpretation of seeing opposite directions of motion producing different effects where there is actually only one direction of motion. This leads to the improper direction of winding and ultimately inefficiency of our coils. Not going to spend much time here. I just want to show you that there's, because we use almost entirely cylinders of coils, they've worked out mathematically the relationships between these things. Remember the B was what they were calling the magnetic component. That has a relationship with basically the number of turns in the coils and the amount of current going through it. However, I've mentioned to some of you that there's a problem with that in that the more number of turns you have in the coil, the longer the length of the wire. The longer the length of the wire, the more the resistance increases, and thus the current must go down because the resistance increases. So you see there's this tug of war, and eventually you lose every time because the resistance limits the current flow. This means that you have to have a ton of turns. That's why transformers are so large and they contain so much copper. This is just a little bit more about how the electric current is conceived in today's science. There's actually this idea of a conventional current versus an electron flow. Basically, Ben Franklin said it flows from positive to negative, or negative to positive, doesn't really matter. But then later on they changed it and they said it goes the other way. So there's this idea that nobody really even agrees which direction the current flows to begin with. So neither are completely correct because the actual source of the current is the zero fulcrum at the center of the wire. Skin effect, anybody familiar with skin effect? Where's the current? It's only at the surface of the wire. So where's the energy really? At the middle of the center of the wire, the fulcrum. The opposite pressure conditions, the cells produce motion, but each condition takes what it needs from the other, from their dividing equator. Okay, whoops, that one's important. Come on. Okay, so this is one of the most important concepts that we can apply to electrical engineering, and I don't say that lightly. We've been plagued with this problem of thinking of everything as positive and negative. Even in an alternating current where the polarity is reversing, you still have a hot and a neutral, which is analogous to a positive and a negative. But in reality, the Russells teach us something extremely profound, which is that the negative condition is the zero in the middle. Both extensions is a positive direction. So there is no negative charge, as I was saying yesterday, in nature. Negative means to negate or void a performed action, which is the cessation of motion. This is indicative of the cathode dividing plane here. Nature's divided poles are equally plus the zero of their fulcrum, cathode, in opposite directions. This perspective changes our understanding of electrical engineering entirely. You must get rid of the idea of positive and negative electricity. Much confusion and inefficiency has resulted from this mislabeled positive and negative, and there is obviously a lack of symmetry by using one-way thinking exclusively in the way that we design electrical devices. So here the Russells are showing the battery. This is applicable to a battery. This is applicable to a bar magnet. Anything, essentially, that exhibits polarity in the universe. You can utilize this concept. This is why Russell shows male and female. Notice conical also back here. Conical versus cylindrical. So more on that. Curvature begins with polarization, which produces a radial, or I would say bilateral universe as well. A radial universe causes all of the prototypes of the bar magnet to be cones. He's telling you right there. It's not encoded. It's not a secret. For one end of is the gravitative center of contraction. Remember north, as I was saying yesterday. And that's what we think of as contracted solids. And the other end is the evacuated center of expanded space, being the cone base. So the explanation of matter and space is basically the fact that nature's bar magnet prototypes are essentially cones. Cones wrapped around in 360 degrees exhibit spherical character. They divide motion, which is traveling away from a center of gravity, and multiply motion that is traveling toward a center of gravity. So I want to point out something important here. If you take a bar magnet and you pick up a nail, you can pick up the nail with the north end. You can also pick up the nail with the south end. Doesn't that mean that each pole is equally gravitative and radiative? So how is one positive and one negative? The negative condition is in the middle of the magnet, sometimes called the block wall.
Well, the reason it is that the supposed north pole in a bar magnet is repelled by the north pole of the Earth. That's how they got the name.
But the magnet itself is an electrically divided, polarized condition. The electrical vortice, which is causing that effect, is essentially compressive. So it's neither attraction nor repulsive. It's compressed within a vacuum. It's an entirely different way to look at it. Does that make sense? Not really? In other words,
No, not really.
there's no. So remember yesterday I was talking about Newton and Coulomb. Coulomb was talking about magnetism, attraction and repulsion. Newton was saying matter attracts and repels, right? So he's essentially saying that those two, you can look at them independently and say that they're two different things, or you can just look at them and say, okay, anything that is divided is compressed from the outside, not attracted from within. Like air in a tire. You can't pull air into a tire, right? You force it in from the outside. So the nail isn't attracted here. It's forced here by an electrical vortice. It's simply invisible to your senses. But Russell knew it was there. That's why he's drawing it.
Well, the nail is also trying to return to the equator. It just gets stopped by the end of that.
Right. It's essentially this whole problem is the result of the mischief of iron, because iron retains its focal poles. If you look at iron on the Russell periodic chart, it's very close to the amplitude on the red side of the spectrum. So it's so close to the amplitude that the electrical vortice is still there. So when you get it near an electrical vortice, it exhibits those properties.
Because he had mentioned that when he looked at our solar system, he wasn't sure whether it was a carbon atom or a iron atom, because the shape was so close to it.
Right.
That's fascinating.
So I realize this is new thinking. So I know it's not readily acceptable by everybody. That's okay. Again, we're planting seeds, and they will bear fruit perhaps later on. So I just want to show this idea of, okay, so if the action is not attraction or repulsion, it's compression within a vacuum. This means that we can engineer compression. Because if this is not the magnetic component, this is basically like a galaxy. So when you take this shaft and you bend it just as it bends in a wave field, now everything radiates out from a common center, which means that this is zero potential. So it's almost like a 90-degree offset. You're bending all of these radii toward a common center. And this is why the center of a coil exhibits no magnetic property whatsoever, because you can see it's zero potential. But at the ends, you slip a bar through here, and now you've electrified the bar, not magnetized it, electrified it. And that's why it can exhibit what they think of to be magnetic pole.
So the white drawing up in the corner is,
That's when it's straight.
that when it's not, that's when it's
Right,
straight.
so this
That's-
is
That's when it's straight, this is
when you
apply
curve it.
your new
Right.
theory.
So you take a straight wire which has current going through it, and you bend it into a circle. Now you've curved, you've given it dynamic potential. Just like your, this is just the wire. But we're going to show you that I'm just showing you this is what happens in one turn of a wire. Yep. So like when I was answering your question about the wire, remember I was saying when you pluck that wire and you pull it, you disturb it from its equilibrium, you're giving it dynamic tension. When you curve this wire and put current through it, you've achieved the exact same thing. When you curve the wire, notice how these are all parallel to one another?
Yeah.
When you curve it, now there's more density here and less density here. North, south.
If I may, picture the cross-section painting of the wave in your mind. You're looking at it. That I had up there earlier. Yes.
So curving the wire gives it dynamic tension, which means it will perform work. Very useful for us to do. Right, I've basically explained that. So again, the shaft this is zero potential. There's no motion in the center of the wire, but because it's curved, the potential follows that path, just like the wave. We're engineering the wave. We're getting it to do something that we want it to do. Okay. So the Russells always, Walter said this in a new concept: all matter, whether of Earth, suns, or corpuscles, meaning particles, is formed between the opposite poles of two magnets. Again, he's just using this so that you can understand it. To produce the effect of gravity, two dividing equators must be united as one. This is essentially what this means. And you can try this for yourself. We're going to show the experiments later on. Jim was showing me his magnets, and he was trying to push two norths together. And if you could see the light effect of that, it would look just like this, mother and a mother. There is no union that can occur there. However, you reverse it mother-father, suddenly you have the idea or the sense of attraction. But it's really avoidance, isn't it? And again, same thing here. Notice that he's showing the vortice here and the coil above, basically saying the coil is the vortice. You can make it.
Darren, could I say one thing just on that last picture?
Sure.
Lao used to use this to describe or carry it over into relationships as well. You know, just on that human side.
Mm-hmm.
And that was her role, take this and, you know, kind of move it over into the everyday kind of stuff. So, you know, the more frequency arguments are, the more violent the arguments are, you're staring at it right there at you.
Right. So in essence, this is, I'm speaking of this as in electrical terms, but this is as understandable as in your everyday life. It doesn't have to necessarily be this complicated electrical engineering thing, right?
That'll be the new psychologist of the future.
And they're even saying it here. This is how matter is born, you know. So we're interested in replicating sex division and reproduction. I like this image because a lot of these things I've experimentally verified, and we'll get to that. But notice this one-way direction. But what do you notice about this? This is a rough schematic of the optical dynamo, which we'll cover in detail. But you notice how the wires divide in the middle, and so this one's going counterclockwise, clockwise. So it's the same direction, but the direction of the wires turn is mirror image. That's very important. We won't get into that exactly right now, but I just want to bring this up now so you can see this. clicker's awesome. There we go. Is that the one? No. Okay. So we're just going to go right into the experiments because there's no better way to really explain it than to just see the experiment. These are steel cores. I had these fabricated. I paid out of my own pocket because this was pretty early on that I was doing this. I basically realized that where you begin to test this is basically by saying, okay, if all matter or corpuscles or anything is formed between two bar magnets and a coil essentially replicates the same thing as a bar magnet, then why don't I take... Matt, can you just move me forward 2 slides? Thanks. Okay, so why don't I just make 2 then, right? And keep everything symmetrical. So I have a bicone, which is a division of 1 cathode. So I'll make 2 of them so that I keep everything symmetrical. Seemed like a good place to start. So this is what I did.
How big is it? What's the scale?
These are about maybe 1.5 inch length from base to apex. They're not very big, but I didn't want them to be that big because honestly, stainless steel is pretty expensive. And you know, a lot of people, I once talked to Toby Groats about conical coils, and he said that they were nearly impossible to wind. Now, I'm not an electrical engineer, but I wound conical coils, so it can't be that hard. And I invite everybody to try this, please, because it's
One layer of wire?
it's one layer of wire.
And
Yep.
stainless steel?
The core is stainless steel or just
Wires are copper?
copper wire, enamel coated.
Where's the other half of the Y-con?
We'll get there. But notice the optical dynamo, you only need two cones pointed at each other. So I realized for our purposes to test this, let's start with what Walter did. You're absolutely right though, because basically I call this quarter wave or half wave. Full wave would be both bicones. Yeah, so that's important.
Hey Darren, what would happen if you grew the cones to lay the copper into it?
You could, you could, because this is so basic, I basically what I did is I just laid down double-sided tape.
Would it detract from, or would it reduce the efficiency or increase, or just remain the same?
Don't think so. It should stay there, and it'll have a groove to follow. So, the real problem is maintaining tension on the wire while you're winding it, because if you don't have some kind of adhesive, this thing's going to slide all the way around. Yeah. There's another reason probably why they stick to cylindrical solenoids. It's much easier to wind. You can have a machine do it for you very easily on a lathe. So I just want to show you this is what I built. Now let's see what these things do. So here, these initial experiments I all did with direct current. So I have 1/2 of the bicone coil and the current's off. And the compass is pointing toward the North Pole of the Earth, as it does. From the base to the apex, the coil is wound clockwise. So I'm just showing you this is what it looks like when there's nothing going through it. Okay, boom, current's, oh geez. Current's on. Okay, I'm putting 2.2 volts at 3.1 amps. This is a 26 American wire gauge, so it's a pretty small gauge. And I have the positive terminal coming out of my DC source connected here, and the negative one here. Unfortunately, it gets a little too complicated to say that these are both positive, but they are. But when you buy a DC power source, you get a positive and a negative. So you have to be able to interpret that and use it so that your experiment doesn't make total confusion to you. So I'm just showing you how I'm connecting it. And in fact, so now you can see that I'm creating gravity here, electric potential, because I'm spinning it. Okay, so this is what any coil will do this.
The coil's not moving, it's just
Correct.
got power to it.
Correct. So here now I'm showing, okay, so now I have the opposite polarity at the base of the cone. All right, pretty standard. Why is there such a delay on this? Okay, forward. All right. So now the iron filings. The iron filings make this thing visible because you can't really see what's going on here without some kind of viewing film or some kind of way to see what kind of curvature that this coil type produces. So you can see that I'm basically running, so I have about 3 amps going through, maybe, I haven't actually counted all these, but it's one layer, so it's really not that many turns. And I'm getting basically a huge amount of I don't want to say attraction, but that's what your senses interpret. Things want to stick here, which means what? Gravity, right? But look at the other end. I'm hoping it's going to shift. Look at the other end of the coil.
Wow.
Where is the attraction as far as your senses are concerned?
The
Periphery of the coil.
So none are there none in the middle?
I couldn't get anything to stick here.
Just like you were just saying, experiment with the bar.
Right.
Not,
This is why Russell says the nature's magnets are cones. Because as you get into space, things are more expanded. The rings unwind as you get further away from a center of gravity. He uses this idea of a nail and a divided nail. He says basically a nail will stick to the apex of a conical magnet, but it won't stick to the base. It won't stick when it's all together in one mass. Here, if you powder it into a fine powder, it will stick.
I have a question concerning this. It's very simple. At this point in your experiment, does it matter what direction you wind that wire?
Not really, because I'm only using a quarter of the wave.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, now when you turn the two together, does it make a difference where you start your direction?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll get there.
All right.
Excellent. Yeah, you're thinking, that's good. You're thinking about how this works as one system, right? So I just wanted to show that. Now, I did so many of these different kinds of tests, but now I have a full bicone. You can see. And again, I'm dividing in the middle. Why do I divide in the middle? Because nature divides before it multiplies. This concept needs to be applied to our coils. And I'm going to show you actual experimental evidence of how you get extra efficiency if you apply that idea. But basically, I'm showing you okay, so now I have the positive terminal connected to the apex and the negative terminal to the base. But both of them, they're mirror image. So in other words, what I have here is a parallel connection in the middle, parallel connection on the end. And I'm producing, see, north and south, conventionally speaking.
The windings are the same direction?
Clockwise, counterclockwise, connected in parallel. Not series, parallel. Okay? And so you see, essentially, I'm creating a bar magnet. But I'm using 2 different directions of winding, connected in parallel. Same effect. Okay. Oop. So here I'm showing you, if I bring this compass, which is just really showing you where all the curvature is heading toward, if I bring it closer to this equator, you can see it's more or less neutralized. It's bending equally this way and this way, right in the middle of the coil, which is the division. So this is where the winding terminal begins, right in here, and goes out to either side, just as he draws it in Atomic Suicide. Now, this is the money shot. So anybody who has Atomic Suicide, open it up to page 133, and it says this. Walter says, make 2 conical coils and put both apices together. If they could meet at a sharp point, you would need but 1 needle to find the common center of gravity. If you would spread the cones apart and put some fine iron filings there, you will find that they will gather together in a ball, and your needle will point always in the direction of increasing density in that ball. You need but one needle now for two will do the same thing. Now pull your cones apart far enough to elongate the sphere into a spheroid. You can now use two needles for you have again divided gravity. But the main thing I want to point out here is that I tried this, and it does exactly what it says that he said it would do. Makes a spherical mass.
That's probably a first in many years.
Out of iron filings.
Iron filings.
And there is power going through. both
DC
ends.
power. Yep. Same amount. I used the same amount of current in every test because I wanted to eliminate, multiple
Is
variables.
power going to both ends of it?
Both coils. Yep.
Both coils.
Yep.
Where do you
So-
get the DC power and how much power are you sending?
It's a DC power supply, so it's taking 120 AC and making up to 50 volt DC, probably up to 5 amp max, so not very much. But again, I'm using very thin wire, so the resistance is pretty low.
Overdo it.
Yeah.
Darren, can this same concept be applied to the cube when you see the tetrahedrons, or is that another ballgame?
Yes, well, so you notice I've only chosen one angle of the cone to use, and I made it out of steel, so you can adjust the angle of the cone.
It could be way out.
But you know what I'm saying? If you took a cube and you had two here facing, two here facing, two here facing.
Okay, so you're talking about what Binder was trying to do.
Okay.
He would take what a pair of solenoids going this way and then another one going this way. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, if you did the cube, right?
Right, and then maybe another one going this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't quite agree with that idea for the simple reason of there's a gravity shaft going through here, right? If you turn that and now you have a gravity shaft going this way, does that ever really happen in nature? Not really. Every mass is, the poles are, consider this the Earth. They say it's a North Pole here and a North Pole here, right? And then an equator. So to rotate it so that you have another north and another south going here is sort of doesn't really happen.
Did you try it? Did you try that experiment doing this way?
With like having cones here and here?
Exactly what you're doing, only this way instead of this way?
No, because what I'm having here is an elliptical amount of energy, and I don't want to put anything in here that would disturb that effect.
How do you call that, east-west?
He did, yeah, east-west. It'd be like an expansion of the ring around the spherical mass. But so I just wanted to show that if you take what he's saying here and try it, it actually does work. It does what he says it does.
Proof, physical proof.
Now,
You sprinkle the iron filings in there as you turn on the DC source?
yeah, basically turn the current on and then, but let me tell you, they fly right to there. Yeah. Or I should say they're compressed there.
Right.
That's more accurate.
Excellent.
So then I kept going. Now you see what he's saying, okay, elongate it. So in other words, pull it apart. So I start pulling it apart and notice it's not really a perfect sphere anymore. It starts to get a little elongated. All right, so even farther, bigger gap, more prolate sphere, if you're familiar with that term. But basically, it's pulling apart the poles.
Is it pulling the same amount of mass of
Right, it's the
particles?
same
So the
yeah.
same amount of mass of
Right.
particles because of the amount of energy.
But if you compress it together even more,
It's involved.
Yeah.
It's the same mass.
right,
It didn't attract more.
Right.
Whether it's closer or further apart.
right.
So you can actually take those coils and run them through each other, it would start opaque, correct? You could push them, you know what I'm saying?
But the problem with that is you would need an air core coil at that point, which basically means high frequency. So because I'm using DC, and you're only going to get permanent field, is what I'm saying. Does that make sense? Like to push these two together, you couldn't have a steel solid core. You would need an air core, which means a high frequency coil. That's
dangerous, so be careful when you get around.
yeah. Well, that's what Tesla was doing. His Tesla's transformers were all air core coils because he was using high frequency, high potential currents. Here I'm using low potential, low frequency currents. So steel core is applicable.
Tesla was not using wire because he said it was wireless.
So why are you using wire?
Well, his coils had wire.
They did.
The energy he was radiating out didn't need wires.
Were they conical
It's transmission.
coils or?
Yes, we'll get, no, yes. The answer, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how much I can talk about Tesla in this discussion, but yes, to answer your question.
Yeah. Was that, when you hook the wires up, are the coils multiplying the energy?
Yes. Yes, so one thing I haven't mentioned yet is I do have a Gauss meter. A Gauss meter measures magnetic field, but we know it's not really a magnetic field. It's what it is it's called a Hall sensor. A Hall sensor basically measures electrical potential, and that gives you can convert that number that you read into a chart that gives you how strong a magnetic field is. So you can use them to test magnets and so forth. The magnetic field strength here is enormous compared to what it is at the cone base, which to me indicates multiplication of energy.
So you got more out than you put in.
Well, if I use one, it's not more, there's no out in this case. I'm not pulling anything out of the system. I'm just creating, I just want to see what the field does, what the interaction of the two conical magnets do to one another.
The potentials are the same on both ends, but the volume is different.
Right. Exactly. Here the volume is compressed, here the volume is expanded. So I'm essentially applying an optical principle to electromagnets, right?
So if these were our traditional cylindrical coil or copper wrap.
The Gauss would be the same at both ends.
But would the power of the magnetism or whatever, it's not magnetism, but the power of the energy holding in the middle be less than what you're able to create?
Well, it'd be static. That's why I was saying with a cylindrical solenoid, it's static because each diameter is the same. So what do you notice about the cone shape? Every turn you make in this as you get toward the apex is a smaller diameter, which means what? You're compressing energy from the outside to the inside, just as you do in a tire. Same principle here. It's just done in a coil. Okay? So yes. I mean, I'm going to do, we'll do questions at the end. Is that cool with everyone? Okay, so let's just conclusion, so just from this first initial set of experiments. We can conclude that the center of the base of the conical coil is zero potential because nothing would stick there, as evidenced by iron filings, right, only at the perimeter of the edge. Density is maximum around the edge and minimum at the center. We can also conclude that the apex is maximum potential as it will compress a large amount of mass, meaning the filings, to a relatively small surface area. Density is maximum at the center and minimum around the outer edge, being space. We can conclude that the conical coils do behave differently than standard cylindrical solenoids due to polarized differences in volume and surface area, as Jeremy mentioned. We can also validate Russell's description of how these coils should behave. Of the attempted experiments, all effects he describes in writing thus far were found by me to be true. In my opinion, his work merits further investigation and credibility. Okay. Now, this was some work done by Toby Groats based on a patent by Earl Koenig. Basically, you see what he has here is two mirror image symmetries on the same core. And he's winding them, and he's connecting them in parallel. What he found when he did this is that basically the resistance drops, which means the current can go up, which means that the whole efficiency of the coil goes up. Do I have any electrical engineers or anybody who studied electrical engineering? Okay. Resistance in parallel. 1 over R. 1 over R, right? So a one-way coil, if it had 8 ohms resistance, if you cut that wire in half, now you have 4, and you connect them in parallel, it's 2 ohms now. So you just demolished the resistance, and all you did was change the winding and how you connect the current. And Toby Groats proved this. He has a whole circuit that measured the resistance and everything. And he published this. This is a from 1989. So in the patent they call this mirror image symmetry coil one. DC. And AC, it works for AC too, but that gets a little more complicated. But he tried it on transformers and the efficiency still appears there as well. Which again to me kind of validates Russell because he made that drawing. He made the drawing where it splits in the middle back in the 60s. And this was way before this patent was even filed. So we can conclude that the mirror image symmetry coil winding is a technological method by which to control this sort of dual polarity and has a measurable advantage over conventional winding methodology. Yet this technique is not used at all. Every coil that's wound nowadays in every transformer on every pole is single direction winding. But if you cut that in half and wind it using a mirror image symmetry, the efficiency goes up. So why is that not used? I won't cover that. That's just a little overkill. We'll go past that too. It's just more applications of how you can use these things. So I want to get to the optical dynamo because we saw this morning. So here's the coil. Here's the schematic for the coil, which is in the archive. Has all the dimensions on it.
Is this published anywhere on the net?
This is on the USP website. You can go there under Science Articles, and there's one called Optic Dynamo Generator. And we put them all up for everyone to see. So these are two coils. Again, they work in pairs, just like the ones I've shown you before. And they were in the warehouse.
That was the heat water?
We'll get there. Okay. So, okay, do I have the... Oh, schematics after this. All right, so basically I looked at this and I was experimenting with conical coils. And I went through a lot of the archive, not all of it, but I found correspondences, letters, descriptions, and I read them all. And I basically, out of that and looking at this and with all my experiments, tried to back engineer how this thing works. So basically I've found that the optical dynamo alone was not really designed to produce electric power directly. In other words, the electric power didn't come out of the coils, which is sort of what everybody kind of thinks when they first look at this, that somehow, power in and power out. But that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is it produces over unity efficiency by way of thermodynamics only. That is, that it produces more heat by gravity compression than the input current can produce by other methods alone. By other methods, I basically mean cylindrical coils. The resultant heat is used to vaporize water, just like a nuclear reactor, at great speed, and basically this motivates a steam turbine. And the turbine produces a motive force, a prime mover, which runs an alternator, which uses Mr. Tesla's invention of the rotary magnetic field, the vortex of the alternator, either by field induction or by brush contact. At the time Russell was doing all this, brush contact was still pretty much the way to do power, which basically means friction against a brush, just like a friction generator. That was the state of the art at this time. So once you have that rotation, the steam is basically recondensed spirally again back into liquid, and the cycle restarts perpetually. The RPM of the turbine is fast enough to produce current for use and also for self-motivation of the coils, producing the heat. So essentially power into the coils. Coils create heat. The heat creates the steam runs the turbine turns the generator produces electricity in abundance. You take some of that current and put it back to the coils. The water, as an independent system, is taken from a liquid state to a gas as it expands from the heat. It is then recondensed once it's produced motion or work, and it is spirally recondensed back into a liquid and fed back in perpetuity. Now this system was probably since it was a small-scale nuclear reactor, would put out probably around 10 kilowatts of power, which is enough for a modern home. At that time, again, we're talking the 60s, so it's, you know, they didn't have plasma TVs and refrigerators running all the time, you know. So this system is essentially was designed by Walter and Lao to replace the atomic reactor. Because as you can see, if you can wind up heat out of the cold of space, you don't really need nuclear material to do that job for you. I think it was Einstein or somebody who also said, you know, can't we think of a better way to boil water? Well, Walter invented a better way to boil water. And this is only one application of these coils, okay? So here's the schematic. I'm sorry if it's not too visible. Ramu did a really good job cleaning these up. But here it is. This is on the website. You can see what it is. He had many different variations and dimensions, but the basic design is exactly the same. You can see the coils. Notice this is more of a stacked solenoid where I used a sharp cone. Same effect, though. And actually beautifully displays the mathematics that goes into the coil. What's interesting is it's the same amount of wire on each coil. So, but the core gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So this is actually more of a volume issue. You have the same amount of wire, which means you have the same amount of resistance.
Same thickness of wire?
Same thickness gauge, and it goes from one to the next, to the next, to the next.
More layers as it gets smaller?
More layers, very good. So what happens is you see that the diameter of the core here gets smaller and smaller. However, there's the same amount of wire. So you're basically, you would have more turns as the core gets smaller. But it's the same amount of resistance and it's the same amount of current going through each succeeding step up. Walter says that every wave is a step-up transformer in 4 steps on either side. He essentially applied that principle to this device. So he's stepping up heat toward the direction of the anode or the sun. And he designed this armature, which he said is a power focus of 32,768 times what you begin with here at the base. And again, it's projected from this side and also this side. So the best way I can really get you to think about this is if you want to make heat, you want to make a fire, there's one way to do it, which is that you have to put a lot of energy in. You have to rub 2 sticks together, you have to get them going really fast, and you have to get the friction high enough to resist that motion to create heat. Or if you understand light, you can take a lens, biconvex, focus it to a point, and let the light do the work for you. And you don't have to put any energy into it at all, do you? Whereas the energy is supplied to you from the environment, from the motion of light waves. So he's showing you the same principle here in a bar magnet. Same thing. Same applicable. He's showing you the mathematical example there. This is power multiplication applied to a device. And here he's showing you how it's wound. Notice clockwise, anti-clockwise, connected in parallel. Does that look familiar? Yeah, he was 91 years old. Now those coils aren't small. Everybody saw that.
Yeah.
Those are huge coils.
What are they made out
The material that supports it is wood of some kind. There's a metal core, which I'm assuming has a high magnetic permeability, like a stainless steel or iron of some kind. Stainless steel is mostly iron, just a few impurities.
X-rayed at some time next year, but again, it all requires funding.
And then copper. I can tell you for a fact it was 18 American wire gauge. Found that in the archives.
Is there a perfect ratio for the diameter of the core as compared to the...
Yep, and he had to work that out. Notice that there's 4 steps here. The coil that you saw has 8. So doubling it seems to have an effect, much to what you were talking about. And again, that has to be worked out experimentally. And I just want to show you, power multiplies this way, power divides this way. So where's the steam pressure? Here and here, all in one plane. So essentially he has a boiler here that's presumably quite thin, not much in distance this way. Because
Seen it? What's it made out of?
we haven't seen it. We don't know where it is.
Oh, it's not in the other box?
Nope. All that we found in the warehouse were the coils. We don't know where the armature. This is the armature here, and this is the boiler.
He's got to have made them.
It had to exist at some point, but we don't know where it is. I'm not.
Keep in mind too, that one in the warehouse could have just been a prototype.
Right.
As it was.
Now, I won't get into the history too much, but he was in discussion with Raytheon about this device, and they were going to build one. So who knows whatever happened to that. That was lost into the annals of time. And then he's just showing here that basically you can connect this compressed water steam to a steam turbine, which motivates a wheel, which by friction of the brush contacts produces electrical current. So again, you're seeing that the coils themselves don't produce the electrical power. The power comes from the heat, which is basically how all power stations work. You have some kind of nuclear thing creating steam. The steam runs the turbine. That sends out a polyphase down to your substation, down to your house. It's all high frequency, step down, and that's how you get your 120, 240 AC at your house.
How would you hook up a device using that?
Well, you could do what Walter did and just build one the size that you need to produce the amount of heat that you would need.
Where would you make the connection? Like where, if you have the wires coming in, and then all the power is at the point, right?
The heat is here. The current's a closed system. In other words, it's a closed circuit as far as the coils are concerned. But in thermodynamically, this is a sun right here. And you can manufacture it in your basement if you wanted. Does that make sense?
No. I mean, it makes sense what you're saying, but I don't know how you would run your refrigerator off.
Well, it'd come out of the generator. It'd come out of the generator, which is it'd be a separate system altogether. This is what I'm suggesting to you is that essentially what this device is a high efficiency induction heater. So this itself does not produce the electricity, right? So it would come out of an alternator just like it does out of the alternator where it's coming from now, except that alternator is miles away, wherever, farther away from your substation, wherever the main power comes from that gets to your house eventually. Okay, can I just keep going? Yeah. Okay, I know there's tons of questions. Okay, so I do want to mention one thing. Nikola Tesla had an article in which was called Our Future Motive Power. What he basically suggested we do is stick a large pipe down into the earth. Now, as you get closer to the center of the earth, is it hot? Okay, so that would make steam. And that steam would come back up, run the turbine, run the alternator. And then you take that water and you recondense it and send it back down in a closed system. It even says it, water is circulated to the bottom of the shaft, returning as steam to drive the turbine, and then return to liquid form in the condenser in an unending cycle. So I submit to you that Nikola Tesla was in agreement with Walter, except Walter figured out how to not use the Earth, just wind it up from space in a self-contained unit. It's essentially the same principle. This is a test unit of the optical dynamo. This is the one he sent to people at Raytheon to say, this, if you build this, this is pretty cheap to build. This should give you some good things to start with. This is 1961, March 1961.
Tesla has been dead for like 20 years almost.
Right. So what's next with all this? Well, we all are familiar with giving for re-giving, right? If you want energy independence, then simply give toward energy independence. Help move us in that direction. Because this is a monumental task, and as I said, this is only one application of these coils. I have many ideas about how to do this where you wouldn't need the steam turbine or anything like that. You could simply do it with the coils itself. Sort of like a transformer. You'd have a secondary, and these kinds of things. But these things this has never been done before, except for, say, Walter and perhaps Nikola Tesla to some degree, although he had his own ideas and things that he was doing. So this kind of work needs an enormous amount of research to be done. But using Russell's concepts, we can advance ourselves, I'm confident, about 1,000 years ahead of where we are presently. So I will take questions now. Don't everybody talk at once.
So the whole point
Stand by.
is to take Russellian science and move us off grid. Where we're heading is Russellian science can take us off grid.
I'm saying we can dismantle the grid. I would love to see the grid dismantled in my lifetime.
Eventually, yes, but at least a
the right
whole lot
time.
of people can go, like solar, that's off grid.
Right.
But we can do it with Russellian science.
Correct.
In the way you're seeing it.
Correct. Here's the way you can think about it. The air you breathe is free from the earth, right? The water you can get from the ground, from a spring. When you see a thunderstorm and you see an electrical lightning bolt come down, that is a natural element of the earth. So why are you paying for electricity? If the air you breathe is free and the water you can take from the ground, and you can even grow your own food if you're so inclined. These things are here on the earth for us. So if we know how to manipulate it to get it to do what we want, and it's available for everyone, it should be as free as the air or the water or the food that we grow. It's part of living on the earth. It is our birthright. But you have to get to a certain spiritual, mental unfolding before you don't, because you don't want to abuse that power. But this is the whole point of being mankind. Well, Russell was looking for funding in his time too. You know, can you imagine how much copper that was? You know, yeah. I mean, they needed support just like we do now. I'm simply picking up where they left off, and we are as a group.
We very care about it.
Yeah.
Maybe this is one of your other ideas that you just are waiting for funding. Can you replace the water tube with a thermoelectric material on the same plane?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Should work the same. Yeah.
Thank you, Darren. That was magnificent. Forgive me, I didn't know anything about solenoids before you started your talk, and now I know a little, so thank you.
No problem.
A conceptual question, kind of like I'm thinking about 60 hertz, 60 cycles per second, and what is that, 120 volts or 110 amps or something like that? Our normal system functions on that vibration.
Yep.
In a conical sense, can you help me interpret that in terms of windings or something along those lines?
Yeah, okay. So I will say that I have begun experimenting with conical coils and alternating current. I'm somewhat not ready to talk about that yet. I have made advances and it's very promising, but I have been looking into the 60 hertz thing. Like I said, I can't talk too much about that yet. It's right. It's in the developmental phase still.
So Walter could have produced 60 cycle electricity using a 60 cycle alternator.
Yep. It would depend on the rotation of the turbine.
Right. And of course that's not 100% efficient, but there's enough heat generated that it overcomes that, powers itself, and then there's more energy output from the generator.
Yeah, I would say that the excess energy comes from the heat, not necessarily the current.
And this solution is supremely elegant, more so than other localized grid-free power supplies like solar, because solar is using rare elements that produces pollution and takes a lot of fossil fuel energy to refine.
Right.
Whereas this is using iron and copper.
And water.
And water. I mean,
Correct.
brilliant.
Yeah. So essentially, it's a fuel-less system, or it creates its own fuel as it uses it. Either way to look at it.
Probably an early question, but thinking down the road, has anyone yet considered the political, economic, and/or governmental hurdles moving forward?
I would direct you to Mr. Alan Adkins about that question, or everyone on our research committee. We've had numerous conversations about that. Honestly, myself, I have no idea how to even go about that. I sort of concern myself with the science and how you do this mechanically.
Darren, I'm going to let Alan comment to that.
Please, please.
So, really, I didn't have time to, I was going to try to mention this in my talk earlier because it does relate. It's a great question, a very appropriate question. So you just have to consider, let's just say, for example, we had a device that would allow each of you to power your own house for, basically it would take away your electric bill. After you had the device, there would be some cost for that, but after that there would be probably extremely minimal maintenance, or either none to very minimal, depending on the time frame we're talking about. And there's different permutations of the technology, but it is going to happen. And so the question becomes well, individually, are we as individuals ready to accept and be responsible for that in all the ways, and I'm not going to get off into that, but that is an issue. And then we go out to the broader issue of your family, your community, and then on and on, out from that. The states, federal government in our case, etc. So the issue for humanity is, are we ready to step up to the plate and be responsible enough for ourselves to embrace, for what in modern history anyway, is a demonstrable technology that solves one of the biggest problems facing humanity.
And on the other hand, if we had this as our source, would we be willing to step up to what we presently have? Probably not, right? I mean, if we all had our own individual power plants in our house, how eager would we be to say, oh, I want to put this aside and go to a centralized power plant?
Well,
probably not.
I'll tell you how I would do it. So if this device just produces rotation, then the alternator can put out three-phase power, which means that one of these devices could run your house, your neighbor's house, and your next door neighbor's house. So I would use this in a communal system. I think it would function best that way. And it would have to be adopted. Anybody familiar with the Mither-Nertha community in Switzerland? Bill Baumann was an inventor. He designed an electrostatic generator device that puts out all the power for that community. And it's completely self-contained society. And they do not release the plans because they say mankind is not ready for it yet. So I would suggest that maybe we try something like that to begin with, where a group of individuals who say, you know what, we can do this, and we want to do this, and so that they do it. Anytime you get enough people together and they all want to do the same thing, that's when things get done.
That's why our chairman, John Hale, refers to the 9 of us as a superorganism, the Science and Research Committee. I call us the 9 companions, think of Lord of the Rings, but we're trying to throw the ring into Mordor, but not kill ourselves in the process. So.
Right. And I should say also that we're also working mostly on the actual alternator itself. That's been the primary focus for me. If we can increase the efficiency of the alternator, then this whole system just gets way better.
Have you thought of testing some sort of,
Uh,
plugging in?
we could, but you know, that's been sitting there for a long time, and
You can only blow a fuse.
right, it's true.
Good point.
We could. I would feel more comfortable starting with smaller scale, like I have, and working from that basis. It'll tell me a lot more versus trying to just purely reverse engineer that particular design.
May I point out that when that was, when those two boxes were in the basement of the palace, they were closed and they were pristine and untouched. When we found them, they were open and clearly tampered. We don't know what they might have done
Right.
in there. So.
Right. I know just from reading that Tim Binder took those coils to Colorado, I think, and Ron Kovac
They were shipped to
ripped
Ron.
them.
They were
ripped them
shipped to
apart.
Ron, and then they were shipped back to the warehouse.
Yeah, so I don't know what he did with them. He might have changed them, he might not, I don't know. That's why I said rather just go with what I'm intuitively feeling to do with it.
We've raised about $4,000, and to get any of us to come to Virginia to work on those coils would require huge amounts of money that we just don't have. So again, the dream is to all of us, Hannah, of course, and everyone else, to be working together in a lab where we could eventually move on to optical generation.
Those coils also belong in a museum.
Right. Question?
I've heard that 60 hertz could be harmful for our body.
I think it is.
It
And
only
yet,
hurts for a little while.
I will tell you, I did one experiment with, I dismantled a transformer, and because those cores are designed for 60 hertz, and I wound coils utilizing different winding techniques, and you can actually feel the vibration of the 60 hertz. And to me, intuitively, it does not feel biocompatible at all.
so my question is a little further than that, and if you could please elaborate, if it's not too early, on potential applications of purifying the environment, healing ourselves, or being in healing radiant energy, and or reducing pollution in areas that have big political ramifications, water,
Right.
the ocean, and all that stuff. Is there any way to purify and cleanse the environment with this energy?
I think the first step is to just like stop using fuel. Combustion if you're looking, if you really get this, then you kind of realize that combusting fuels isn't really necessary anymore, is it? Isn't there motion if this is a universe of motion, there's motion everywhere. So what becomes the prime mover? Does it even need to be a rotating mass? You see what I'm saying? So yeah, I can see, I would just say read Tesla. He envisioned a whole system that was safe and also required no wires.
Are we over the tipping point, though, where the system and environment itself cannot purify, even if we go all the way into applying the energy like this?
So there's a couple things that come to mind for me. One is that we are over consuming we're taking minerals out of the Earth's crust. And that's not a good thing to do because the Earth has circuits just like your circuit board in your computer does. So if you start pulling out copper and tin and aluminum out of your computer, eventually something's not going to work right anymore. So yeah, I think there is a tipping point where we're going to pull so much ore out of the crust that the electrical properties of the Earth are going to dynamically change. And who knows how that's going to manifest? Could be earthquakes, could be, who knows? Could be weather disturbances.
Well, that gets back to Dr. Russell's quote, that it will not be wars or rumors of wars that bring man to its knees, it will be the weather.
Right.
Well, we're seeing that happening.
Right.
What you're
Tsunamis, yeah. Now, the other problem is, and I don't know how many of you are aware of this, do you ever notice that every single power line pole has a rod going down into the earth? So what's happening is 60 hertz has all these harmonic frequencies. And this is a problem basically created because every single appliance in your house runs on direct current. So you have to rectify the alternating current. So when you rectify, you create high harmonics. And illegally, what they've done to solve that problem is to drive a ground rod at every single pole. That's actually technically illegal if you look in the electrical handbook. You're not allowed to use the earth as a return ground. And yet that's exactly what they do. Because why? It's too expensive to run another ground on the wire system. So they use the earth as a return ground back to the substation. Well, in other words,
that affects
there's
milk production in cows.
It does.
Affects trees, life.
anything that
everything.
stands on the earth. Because again, where is the current? It's on the surface of the earth. So then they're driving it right down into the ground.
So even when they put the wires, bury the wires under the ground?
Well, then it's still it's still underground. It's still on the surface of the wire underground.
And even every house has a ground too.
Yeah.
As we all know.
So I'm not saying that, AC distribution system is evil. I'm just saying, it's 2016. There's a lot better options now. A lot better.
Darren, I want to say tremendous presentation. I think you are exhausted and probably could use some water, in which there's some under the podium. So everybody, you're free to ask Darren questions. We're going to
I'll be around.
give him a warm round of applause for his